Hello everyone, welcome again to Matthew Drake's channel, and this week we have a very important guest, Suzanne Venker, who is an author of numerous books, including The War on Men, The Two-Income Trap, The Alpha Female's Guide to Men and Marriage, as well as 7 Myths of Working Mothers. And I actually illustrated a clip from her book, The War on Men, back last summer or so, and finally just getting around to chatting with her, and couldn't be happier to have her on. How are you doing today, Suzanne?
I'm doing well, Matthew. How about you?
Excellent, excellent. And thank you for joining us this Mother's Day. I know you are a mom, so I appreciate you taking your the time out of your day. And that actually is what I'd like to talk about. So a lot of people, they rightly celebrate motherhood, and I, for one, think it is one of the more noble, if not the most noble, callings out there. But a lot of times people generically praise mothers, and I think we can say that some mothers are, they do a better job of raising their kids than others. It's a little uncomfortable to talk about, but I'd be curious in hearing your thoughts, since you've done so much work on the subject, of what you think qualifies a good mother.
Well, you are taking me back a little bit, because I haven't actually written or talked too much about motherhood since my first book, since I've gotten into all this gender relations like that you covered in the War on Men illustration, which was great. Thank you very much. That's a good question. So, to me, a good mother is somebody who's just simply present, right? And that's kind of basic number one. You have to be physically and emotionally present to do that incredibly awesome job that is all-consuming and never-ending. And you can't obviously be around all of the time, but I think that certainly in the early years, I make no bones about the fact that I think that we have suffered in a big way by not having mothers at home in those early years. And there's a book, actually, much more. So my first book was 20 years ago when I wrote about motherhood, but a more recent book called Being There was written by this psychologist in New York City who it was interesting to watch her kind of get thrown into this subject, having been there but so long ago. Only in her case, she just takes kind of a spin on it by explaining how you can make the most of that time and being there for your little ones as much as possible in this world that we live in today, which is, of course, much harder than it was even 20 years ago. But yeah, that's my basic, I never thought about, what makes a good mother beyond just physically being there to do the work, right? To me, that's not to say that there aren't people who are there who mess it up for other reasons. But for what I'm much more concerned with today is just the general absence of parenting, period.
Yeah, you can't be a good mother if you're not there. And I think, unfortunately, we have this idea that people can have a full-time career and also be present for their children, and that's not the case, because children need to be close. They need the skin-to-skin contact. And so I actually did a video about working moms just this past week, and was looking at some of the data and everything. But some of the arguments you'll hear against stay-at-home moms or that kind of lifestyle is, for one, well, we can have the grandparents take care of the kids. And I will say that is better than the other explanation, which is put them in daycare, because daycare is so turbulent, and you don't know, it's really hard to vet the people there, and it's not consistent, the caregiving.
Terrible.
And so, tell people why isn't motherhood something that you can just outsource?
Yeah. So I think the biggest issue is the idea that having children is something that kind of takes care of itself on its own. Like once you get through that whole pregnancy and breastfeeding, the rest is just sort of feeding and changing and, just making sure they don't kill themselves kind of thing. And the reality is there is so much that goes on in those first 3 years that are it's just indescribable. And I think the reason, and I generally think that people don't know this. I really do, because I think that if they knew about what's happening during those early years, that it's not just changing and feeding and making sure they're not, making sure they're safe, that they would think twice about it. At least I'd like to think they would. So the number one most obvious thing is bonding. And again, not a topic that we talk about at all in the media or in the culture, but the bonding process is very, very slow and very tedious and very significant. And if it's disrupted, as it clearly is, if you're not there and you're having a lot of mishmash care, then that bond for many people just simply doesn't happen. And it's, again, really difficult to talk about this, because children will always know who their mom is, even if they have a full-time caregiver, all day. They'll know the difference between mom and the caregiver. But the reality is they're going to bond with the person with whom they spend the most time. That is common sense. It's just a given that whoever spends the most time is going to get that bond. So when that bond is disrupted, as it invariably is with outsourcing, because it doesn't matter whether it's daycare or nanny or grandma, while there certainly are clearly one is better than the other and one is better than the other. You can kind of, obviously a family member isn't going anywhere, so that's ideal. But invariably that person, if it's not a family member, is going to disappear from a baby's life. And that's extremely disruptive. So that's just probably the most obvious issue with early care, is the lack of consistency and lack of bonding that's occurring between babies and toddlers, specifically babies, and their mothers. And of course, this can occur with a father, but it can. And I don't actually talk too much about the difference there, because first of all, even though there are a lot more at-home dads today, it's still nowhere even near how many moms stay home. And I think it will continue that way for a very, very, very long time, for a lot of reasons. And we can talk about that if you want. But regardless, if it's not mom or dad, it's problematic. When you do not bond, you potentially are setting them up for a lifelong issues with relationships and how to communicate and get along and be cared for by others.
Right. And, not that I want to spend too much time on it, but single motherhood is, it's worse than even probably having two working parents. Well, of course, the mother is going to have to be working to bring in income, and there's a greater likelihood for substance abuse, for criminality, and all these things. And so I think that it just makes sense that an extension of that would be, okay, not only do you not, let's say you have a father, but if you have this situation where you're being kind of tossed from one caregiver to the next, like you said, you can't just build that bond and create essentially the children are going to feel like they're constantly in threat of abandonment, because for children this is a real threat. They don't know where you're going and what you're doing when they're that age. So
so all they do is internalize that, oh, you leave and you don't come back, and that affects them in terms of their ability. This is all about intimacy and love, and basically we can't put our finger on and qualify things like intimacy and learning how to love and be cared for in those early years, because that's so basic to who we are, and you don't even think about it until all of a sudden you don't have it, and then things come from that. So it's very problematic to have that bond disrupted in those early years. That's all I can say. And not everybody is messed up for life or whatever over it, but the point is that it disrupts the average person's ability to bond and connect with their future relationships.
Yeah, and I I think that part of the reason it's uncomfortable to talk about this is perhaps because many people experienced that abandonment when they were younger, and so it's harder for them to empathize with the children. Or like you say, they might just not know about it. Either way.
They might have a source for their issues. They
Yeah.
might not. Yeah. There's a number of reasons why we don't discuss it. Plus, it's just not PC, and plus, it makes people feel bad, makes moms feel bad, and there's all of that. So we kind of engage in this closed off, not allowed to talk about that because it's too difficult, and of course that doesn't solve anything. But at any rate,
yeah. And now you've talked about feminism a lot, and related to this staying at home mom topic. One thing I said in the video was that the data does suggest a lot of people, they are very resistant to this idea because egalitarianism has been so ingrained in us. They're very resistant to the idea that even mothers would be happier if they stayed at home. I've seen some surveys that dispute that idea that, women are just as happy in the workplace as they are. And the thing I come back to is like, there's a difference between happiness or contentedness and fulfillment. But beyond that, I've come to the point where I think it's just, at this point, it's not a good strategy to go and tell women, you're going to be happier if you stay at home. So, do this for selfish reasons. I think we have to tell them the facts about how it affects their kids, just like we've been talking about.
Right.
Is that your experience too?
Absolutely. I mean, the focus is so much on mom. And of course, this upends the whole purpose of becoming parents, which is that the world stops and is no longer about you. I mean, that's why you grow up and you have kids and you have responsibilities, and the whole issue of rights and what you want is really out the door. I mean, you go back to what your question was about, being a good mother or a good father, just a good parent. The responsibility comes with the territory, but we don't have it anymore. As a culture, we have no problem with parents abdicating that. And we do it in the name of desire for happiness and rights and what makes you happy and all of that. And there's zero conversation on what children need. It's very taboo to talk about children's needs in our society, which is just so really crazy. I mean, when you think about it, it's crazy that we can't talk about, well, they don't have a voice, if we don't talk about it, but we don't.
Yeah. The left, the liberals, they want to say that women don't have a voice, that minorities don't have a voice. And it's crazy. You never hear anyone say, hey, children literally don't have a voice because we treat them like property, or sometimes worse than that, right? Sometimes people treat their cars better than they treat their kids.
Yep. Like they're appendages. We own them. And so you just can't go there. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, now I do hear a lot of, to switch gears a little bit towards dating, because you've also talked about that. I hear a lot of, there's a lot of advice out there for men on, what is a good way to become an attractive person, but it's a little different for women because men propose and women dispose, and so you're just like the women just sort of their job is really to choose the right husband, and I know you have a book on that, so without just laying out the whole book, what are some of the things that you tell women about what is important when they're looking for that husband who is going to provide them with the security and the essentials that they need, and not just the things that they want in life, right?
Yeah, I do talk about that in several books, actually, that we really don't differentiate between a want and a need because we're so rich as a country. I mean, it's just, there's really no way for people today to really understand what it's like to do without in a really, in a genuine way. And I think that negatively affects marriage and relationships in a big way. That you could almost make an argument that relationships back in the day, when we didn't have as much materially, were stronger. Because when you don't have options, as many options, you kind of think of, okay, I'm stuck with what I've got. I'm going to make do with what I've got. And maybe you work harder at what you've got, rather than this throwaway culture we live in today. So that if something isn't working out for you, you think you're going to get somewhere better somewhere else. So that's a really constant recurring theme in my work, is this concept of the green grass syndrome, and thinking that if that it's better somewhere else than where you've got it, because we're so ingrained, well, especially with technology and being able to have things with one click. Marriage isn't like that, right? Especially a lifetime, assuming it's a lifetime. You're going to have lots of times when you're unhappy with your spouse, and difficulties where you don't know if you can make it through. But back when you didn't have the choice whether or not to make it through, that was actually very advantageous. Now, you'll hear from the culture that that's terrible if you have no way of getting out of your marriage, and I'm not suggesting that is a good alternative. I'm saying that prior to today, where you can literally leave for any reason under the sun and call it irreconcilable differences, that just, divorce begets divorce. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you don't have, I've talked about research about feeling stuck can actually benefit you when it comes to making good choices, because when you have this array of options before you, you're just completely overwhelmed and you're never satisfied. So I think that's a really big issue today with, there's 1,000 issues regarding marriage, modern marriage for today, but I think that's definitely one of them. The younger set, I don't think really has any concept of what it means to be married to somebody for 30, 40 years. I don't think they have a model for it, many of them. So there's that problem, because they're products of divorce. And even if their parents stayed together, that doesn't mean they had a good marriage. So if they didn't want to emulate what their parents had, then there's that problem. So there just isn't a lot of guidance out there about how to do this thing. How do you get married and stay married for 40, 50 years in this culture we live in today? It's unprecedented. It really is. And that goes to the heart of so much of why I do what I do, because it's been, I'm as much a product of that as anybody else. And I'm working through things myself. And I think that if we not have a more positive message and more positive models, not to sound, very pessimistic, but I do think we're kind of doomed. It's okay. So that's pretty pessimistic. And I'm not even a pessimistic person, but I do. I think it's the biggest problem in America today, in the West, is divorce, and how to be married, how to stay married, not having any good messages or lessons to learn, no feel-good stories. I want a whole lot of feel-good stories out there from older people who have been married for decades. I think that would make great reading. And we just don't have enough of it. All we have is the negative.
Yeah, and the thing, too, that I wrestle with is, with the rise of the self-help culture and everything, and sort of emphasis on psychology, which I think has a lot of positive. It's given us a lot of things, but in that, it's kind of led people down this path of constantly improving. And I'm someone who is pretty dedicated to constantly improving, but I think for a lot of people, they think that they just have an infinity of time, and unfortunately, the message that used to be out there of you should panic a little bit because your eggs or your sperm is not going to last forever. It starts to kind of get moldy, if you will, a little dusty, if you will. That's kind of lost, and it does depend on the environment you're in. I think that one of the worst places is university, and so we have tons of women more women than men in university now, and so they're just in this environment where that just is never mentioned, because everybody there is, rightly focused on what happens after I get out of college, and I gotta put this degree to work and everything. So you compare that to something like a church community where, in general, there's people asking you, hey, so, when are you guys going to, start trying? And so there's this the social pressures are a little different, and I think that's negatively affected women even more than men.
Yeah, because women basically are the navigators when it comes to this stuff. So you're talking about marriage and children, relationships, love, all of that. Women are the navigators. They're the relationship navigators. And if they want to go one direction, and really a man has no choice but to follow in that same direction. I mean, she really is the gatekeeper. It's always been that way, and that's not going to change. And because of that, men are sort of left to sort of, well, whatever they're going to guide in terms of, in other words, so if you have, well, just like standards, our standards have lowered considerably, right, in the last 40 years in terms of what we expect of ourselves and what we expect of men. So, and we've been told to act like men and behave like men and push marriage off as long as possible. So all of that has repercussions because you're sending out a message there that I'm not marriage material. It's basically what you're saying. I'm going to have fun and I have birth control and I have sex like men do. So I'm just going to, I'm not serious. You don't have to be serious about me because I'm not serious about me. Well, okay, that's fine until all of a sudden one day you are serious about yourself and you are serious about settling down and all of a sudden you look around and say, well, where are all the men? Well, right. They found the women who didn't do.
Where did all the good men go?
Where did all the good men go? I mean, God, if I have to hear it again, I'm going to scream. It's so obvious where they went, and the women are in charge of that. So they can undo that. They can just decide to undo that. But it's they don't know that they can, or they don't think that they want to. There's a lot of reasons about why they don't, but they can. That's my argument. It would be a big to do to get people to do that, but they hold the key to their own happiness. That's what really is frustrating for me, is that they don't see that they've really created a self-fulfilling prophecy because they really haven't had anybody show them how this specifically very feminist message has harmed them. And this idea of education first, career center of your life, maybe husband and babies down the road. It's not working out. I mean, that's clearly not working out. I mean, all the research shows that. It's very evident, and yet nobody wants to stand up and say, hey, maybe we're going about this all wrong.
Right. Well, I'm tempted to ask whether you think this was something that was intentionally done, or how did we get to this point? That's kind of a big question, but...
Actually, this is really funny that you're asking me that, because I just spent some time with my daughter having this exact conversation. This is pretty funny. Because I was explaining how we got to this point and what is it that's occurred. And she having a much more, I don't know what the word is, better opinion. I don't say better opinion of mankind, but
less cynical.
I don't even think what I was saying was cynical, but she doesn't want to see that people would have anything other than positive motives and not ulterior ones. But and actually I was saying two things really is the biggest problem with the leaders of this movement that want to change the world and have been trying to for several decades, and denying differences between the sexes, for example, and saying that women should put career at the center and not marriage or men, and be independent and all of that. It's really been a massive denial of biology. That's really what they're fighting, Mother Nature, our human nature. And they do so because they don't fit the stereotype or the average feminine stereotype of how most women are. And so since they might not have wanted what most women traditionally want, let's say they want to be a big CEO or a brain surgeon or what have you, whatever it is, they want to be a musician and they want to give all 100% of their time to their craft and not be disturbed with anything else. Those are, no one's keeping anybody from living that way. You're free to do whatever you want. This is America. Go live it and be different, right? And then just be quiet about it. No one's complaining. But that's not what they want. They want the whole world to, or the whole, let's just stick with the country to function, the women in the country specifically, to function the way that they do. Because first of all, it's very lonely at the top when you're a female and you are surrounded by so many men. Second of all, it vindicates you and makes you feel better about yourself, because instead of just accepting that I'm not like most women, which is totally fine, and you should feel fine about that, you don't need us to go do what you're doing to make you feel fine. But there's a big part of that. And then there's this blindsided belief that equality between the sexes means sameness, which means we're supposed to 50% of men are supposed to do what women do and vice versa, which is never going to happen, number one. And number two, it doesn't mean anything even if it did happen, because that doesn't prove equality. So then we have to have this conversation about, well, what is equality then? And of course, that question's never answered, because if you ask a feminist, she just points to the dictionary definition, which isn't helpful, because anybody can see that, but that's not what they're doing. So the way it's played out in practice is very different from the dictionary definition. So that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
So that's.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say. So it's just been a gradual morphing of this small segment, but very vociferous and powerful segment of society that wants to basically rearrange all of society so it accommodates them. That's basically what feminism is, because we know that most people do not identify as feminists. That research has been done. Hopefully people have seen that, but the vast majority of people do not use that word. But of course they believe in equality of the sexes. And then feminists want to argue that, well, then don't you know that means equality of the sexes? Well, no, because most people know that equality doesn't mean sameness, and they're not good with that. And they don't care if 50% of women are CEOs and 50% of men are at home, which is ultimately what they want. So they're up against something bigger than they are. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it always starts out as, we just want to be equal. We just want the same opportunities. And then once they get those opportunities, suddenly it's, oh no, everyone else has to conform to this lifestyle. And as when you think about the outliers, right? The people who, because we sort of recognize that most people are going to fall into this average, right? Where most women aren't going to just make it as some CEO. We kind of understand that, but
they're not going to choose to make it.
They're not going to choose to make it, even if they had the ability. They might not want to. But then you do hear some people who say, "Well, I think I'm different," but a lot of times, what I want to say to them is that that's kind of a big risk to take, first of all. So it might be that they're very different, but there is this fertility window, and so if you don't get a family, then you're not going to have it later on. And there's been successful people, Ayn Rand and so on, who are childless, and they've contributed a lot to society and everything. And we all kind of recognize that there are these outliers, but I sort of don't see the point in. I don't think that they really need some kind of a hero, like Oprah was on TV talking about, oh, well, back in my day, I wish I had seen more role models like me. And it's just kind of silly, this idea that, oh, you need to see somebody out there. You need to see some woman who is like you. You need to see some black woman or whatever. And that is somehow going to empower you. No, I think that if you are really going to do this, then there's nothing that could stop you from doing it in a way. So I think that I'd rather encourage people to have a family, because that is statistically the most likely thing. And it's not slandering people who want to make different decisions.
It's just so funny that we're talking about this. I was literally just doing this for about an hour ago. That's my point, that I'm much more concerned about the masses, or the average person, not the outliers. As you say, I couldn't agree more. The outliers are going to do what they're going to do. And there's nothing the bigger issue at hand is what we're really, really talking about, is that there is an inherent conflict that is never going to go away for a woman. And that's why we can't discuss this same conversation as though it were men and think that you can just flip them out and have the same result. Women are always going to be up against the reality that by the time they hit the peak of their career, their eggs are going bad. Okay. Those converge just at that time when you're like been through school, you started out at the beginning stages, then you get to your middle management, then you're like, okay, which direction do I want to go? Oops, I better hurry up and have babies. Otherwise I'm not going to be able to. There is nothing that is ever going to change that fact.
Yeah.
It's nature, right? We can't change the way our bodies work. So my concern is, hey, don't get into that boat. There are options. You have to plan ahead of time. You have to think ahead of time about what works, what you can do that works around this other thing. So it's all depending on what you want, right? What you want for yourself. If you don't want a family, fine. If you do, how are you going to make smart decisions so that when the time comes, you got to be able to look out 10 years down the road. Well, even when you're 20, 25, this is what I did. Quite frankly, this is how I have what I have in my life without any guilt or any regret, because I didn't. There's nothing. Why? What's to have guilt over? I was always there with my kids. So that whole guilt and stress thing, and I didn't try to balance two things at one time where I couldn't handle it and I was stressful and my kids were feeling the brunt of it and all that. That is a choice that you make, and you don't have to make it. There are ways around that. You can get married early and wait on having kids and have a career first, or you can reverse that. But not too late, but a little bit too late, depending on how long you stay in school. Don't stay in school after 22. I'm a big fan of not making education more than it needs to be. It's a mess anyway today, and it's too expensive. And obviously, if you're talking about law school or med school, that's different. But in terms of everybody else, just get out while you can and don't have that debt. There's just really are options, but people don't often think outside the box unless it's presented to them.
Yeah, I also wonder a lot of times when I see these college women who are kind of sleeping around a lot, we know that the more partners you have, the less the more like you are to get divorced later and less satisfaction and everything. And I just wonder a lot of times, where are these people's parents?
I know.
Do they not care about their children?
Well, no. I think they have a completely different view. Well, there's a mix. Like I do think about that a lot, because on the one hand, you can say, well, that parents can't control what their children do, and there's no question about that. But there's a lot of work to do between birth and 18 before you set them free, where you can set up the values and explain it. It's not about telling them what to do. This is how you're going to live, and if you don't, then blank, blank, blank. It's not about that. It's about modeling a good life and good values and explaining why they worked. I'm very big on that. You can't just tell them what to do. If you have a good argument, kids aren't dumb. They'll listen, they'll absorb it, they respect you. This is all assuming you have a strong relationship, of course. You have to have a good relationship with your spouse. You have to have a good relationship with your kids, because if things are askew at home, they're not going to listen because they're unhappy or they don't like you or they don't respect you or what have you. So assuming that you have those basics in place, you have so much more influence than you think. And so I think a lot of kids are being sent off without having had those conversations or those values explained, and why is not so much about, not just about sex, but about marriage and about career and those are it, right? Sex, marriage, career. What else is there? I mean, those are your big three things. And you have to know what you're doing before you're let out into the world with them. I feel now we're a little overkill over here. My kids would love to not talk so much about this stuff. We have the opposite problem here. But I can feel good knowing that if they make mistakes, that's on them. We did everything we could. I don't think that's going to happen. But I'm not blind either, and things happen. So I just hope that it all works out, of course. But I know that I've done what I can do, and that's all any of us can really do as parents, I think. Right. But I don't think.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you brought it full circle back to the early years, and yeah, that's probably a lot of what's going on. Is these kids didn't develop that bond with their parents early on, and so they didn't trust them, and later on they're trying to somehow compensate for things that they didn't get.
And there's a mental thing there. Like if you didn't stop your life for me, if I wasn't worth caring for when you had me full time, like if I wasn't your number one priority, and kids know whether you're the number one priority, why should they do the same? right? They don't, that has to be modeled. Otherwise, we're all just sort of swimming around looking for purpose and value and for ourselves, really, and not being an example for how to make sacrifices for the sake of others. So.
Yeah. So are there any, because I can certainly think of a lot of bad examples of role models for women, for young women, but can you think of some good examples out there? And one that maybe you could say, Melania Trump, like her approval rating is very high. And I think there's a reason for that. I think it's because people sense that she's kind of got this warm heart, and she's also very feminine. And I think a lot of people look up to that. But are there any that come to your mind?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned her, because there was a time when I was going to write. I never did end up writing anything on her, but it was interesting to watch her with President Trump before he was president, and watch their interchange, because of course the haters are going to think she's, have nothing good to say about her just simply because of who she's married to. But in fact, she exemplifies everything that we're supposedly told a modern woman is supposed to be. I mean, she's completely independent minded, does her own thing, has her own business. They couldn't be more separate in their worlds. They really are, I think, the two of them, if you do some reading on, how they live. And the fact that she's, I mean, I don't know. I get that she'd be a hard example, because when you're dealing with a political figure, it's hard for people to get on board with that if they don't like who's in the office.
Exactly. Yeah.
At any rate, I don't know. I have to think about that. Come back to that about a good role model. That's a good question. I mean, I think the best role models are, the best chances we have for one's role models is one's family members. Personal, I think that goes so much farther than anything they'll see on TV, because that's all, we don't know anything about people's lives on the inside. It's just all for show, but we know our family's life. So that's the awesome, awesome power that you have as a parent, which is why I personally take it so seriously.
Yeah.
I can't imagine being flip about parenting because of that. And if you don't model it right, and you don't have a good marriage, there's that's a whole nother thing. You're setting your kids up to repeat your stuff, repeat your pattern. So it's an awesome responsibility, just to make anyone who feels that weight of the world on their shoulders a little bit heavier now. But I do feel that way. I do.
Yeah, and I think that I'm glad you brought up the media and just there not being a lot of good influences, because boy, the more dirt that comes out about Hollywood, the more I just want to, if I ever have a daughter, I just want to make sure she never leaves the house. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, it's kind of,
it's terrible.
It's ridiculous how.
No, it's ridiculous for what parents have to deal with, what they have to be up against that they didn't 50 years ago. There was a time when Hollywood actually was bound by contract to impart moral messages, ethical messages. Had to, so you think about what exists today. I mean, obviously that's out the window. But in the 30s and the 40s, and even maybe a little in the 50s, you couldn't make the film if it didn't impart something moral, and that's because they knew the weight of their power and their influence. It's just remarkable. So and could be great or could be horrible, and it's just horrible today. Horrible. I mean, you can go back and find messages from movies in the 30s and 40s, and they're wonderful. I mean, you can really use that to bolster, what's going on in your own personal life when it's positive like that. But when it's negative, and a lot of people don't even realize when it's negative because it's couched as, popular or fun or cool or what have you. But when it's negative, it can really set you up on the wrong path. If your family life is already skewed and you're replacing it with the messages from the culture, you're even doubly screwed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, well, they don't recognize that it's negative, and they probably don't even recognize that it's having an effect. A lot of this stuff is subconscious, and I think that if if you have a certain degree of self-knowledge, there's nothing wrong with like watching a modern Netflix show. But I think it's different when kids are young and their minds are being formed. And I guess we should probably take caution about that and watch the consumption, because there is these tablets nowadays, and the electric babysitter is a whole nother topic there.
Aren't you looking forward to parenting?
Okay. I am. I know you said that sarcastically, but I still am. I mean, I know people who say, like, even with all these things, they're just like, this is just such a joy. Now, the person who said that was still a very, very, very new parent, so.
Well, it's true. I'm an old parent, and it's true. It is pure joy, and it's really scary when they're. I have one going off to college now, so looking back at old pictures and looking where we are and wondering how did that happen is really scary. So, but in a good way. I mean, it is wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, it's this crazy and exhilarating mix of having lots of control and having very little control. Right? Exactly. Some things, genetics, personality, it's the luck of the draw.
Yep.
And you're going to get what you get. But there is a lot of things I think which are universal. And I'm not like a geneticist, but I'm pretty interested in biology and how, nature versus nurture. I just think all that debate is fascinating. And people who come down on only one side or the other, I think they just sort of lack any kind of ability for nuance. But it's very exciting. And I feel bad for people who don't get to experience that, and they're probably going to be on their deathbed feeling regretful. I know that I definitely don't want to do that. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in my late 20s. I gotta get married. What am I doing with my life? And I think, that's pretty common for a lot of people. They come out of school, university, grad school even, and then it's just like, oh, where did all that time go? And I still want to do all these things for myself. And the culture has a long way to go.
I think the college experience back in the day was so much more woven with finding a spouse. So I was just reading in the Wall Street Journal, who's the golfer? Help me out here. The big golfer. He's like in his 80s. No, he's in his 80s. Like he's. Oh man, I don't know. His son.
I only know Tiger Woods, so.
I'm sorry. Well, anyway, you would know the name. And that's I'm blanking. But anyway, he's like 80, and he had a thing in the Wall Street Journal. They have a little thing every Friday in the Wall Street Journal that gives bios of kind of famous people, their personal background for like a page. And he was talking about having met his wife in college. And it was just his description of how they met and how it proceeded. And I thought, now this is very common for back in the day. That's just that's what you did. And that's a whole other conversation as to why it was that way. The changing of the sexual environment and rules and birth control and all of that really just changed the whole enchilada. I mean, let's just face it, because when you didn't have that, you didn't have the sexual culture that we have today, your school and your education was wrapped up in finding someone to marry simultaneously. Like you would both go, it was like all wrapped up. Whereas now it's just go get a degree and have fun. It's just about partying and having fun. And then you don't realize that you have all these options before you to choose from. You'll never have such options again out in the real world. It's much more difficult, which is not to argue for early marriage. I do think earlier marriage, going back to marrying younger, is I just personally feel like it's going to happen, and I don't know why. I don't have anything that I'm basing that on, but I think there's a great case to be had for marrying younger, and by younger I mean like 25 on, not 22.
Right.
Because actually the research shows that your likelihood of divorce is not good if you marry younger than 25. But it decreases considerably once you're 25. So I do think marrying 25, 26, 27, with knowing that if you had that in your head, the way you're going to approach things from 20, from 20 to 25 is radically different than if you think, oh, I'll just get married like in my 30s, way down the road, and everything will be fine. And it's very problematic waiting that long.
Well, especially since we're delaying adulthood. I mean, you have people
right.
in they're 25 and they're still living with their parents, and they've never had a job in their life, and you just wonder, like, hey, when are you going to get your life started? So I think that could help out a lot too, is not only marrying slightly younger, but just getting your life started and actually doing things out there, and not just playing video games all day. And I'm sympathetic because there's a lot of things that are kind of rotten, and there's the economy problems and problems with our government, and a lot of things that just, and also like immigration, multiculturalism, a lot of these things aren't great. And I think that's why, Trump won and everything, is because people want to fix some of these greater problems. But it's all connected, I think, and it sucks that there are all these problems, but it's not gonna get better if we stop pursuing family values in any way.
No, and marriage.
Yeah.
Right. No, it's not. I mean, it's going to continue on. So maybe marriage and family could be a buffer, right? Instead of, thought of as you can't do it because you're too poor or what have you. I mean, there are ways around this, and getting back to making family, putting family first. Let's just put it that way. I think there is a way, for sure.
Right. Yeah. And there's something that resonates too. As you can tell, I like Trump, but America first. Well, it's, you put the family first, and by extension, America will come first. I think I like that thinking.
Yep, they go hand in hand.
Yeah. I'm also curious about what are some of the attacks that you get from the media or whatever, and how have you been able to deal with that?
So I would say probably the number one most common theme is, oh, you want to send people back to the 50s. I mean, that's just a given. That's what you're going to hear if you're talking, pro conventional anything, conventional marriage or family. Although, most of the people, well, not most, all the people who make that claim have not read my work. Because actually, if you read my work, I think it's very reasonable. In fact, the people, I've had many liberal readers, self-described liberal readers, say, what's wrong with this? This is just total common sense. And well, yeah, tell that to the media, because the media will, frame it in other ways. But if you take the time to read what I've actually written, I don't think there's a person alive who would have an issue with it. I'm not kidding when I say that it's that reasonable. I mean, there's no hard line, anything except, my first book, I did have a lot of negative things to say about daycare, and I haven't talked about that topic in a while. So I don't have anything good to say about that. So I do take a hard line there. But with the irony of the way I'm presented often is that I'm a case for how you can have both things in your life. I can tell you how to do that. I can tell you what I did. It works if you compromise your expectations, and people don't like to hear that, because you're supposed to have it all, be it all, and do whatever you want, and nothing should ever get in the way. And if, God forbid, you have to compromise, then you've let yourself down. You'll never be happy. I mean, all this just completely pessimistic, ridiculous stuff that is not helpful. Life has accommodations. We have responsibilities, and your true happiness comes in fulfilling those duties and obligations, not in fulfilling your own self needs. And so just some really spiritual messages, I think, in my work that certainly doesn't come through on TV screen very quickly or easily. But you just have to read it to find out. But I'd say that's probably the biggest thing I've had to deal with. And then when I wrote The War on Men, that went viral. So Feminist came out. Actually, it was Feminist who made it viral. I guess I should thank them. But I got a lot of hate mail then, because anybody who stands up for men, and basically anybody who says any woman who says anything negative in any way, shape, or form about another woman is a traitor or a misogynist. But those people are not thinkers. They're not intellectuals. They don't think beyond their needs and their wants. They don't think about other, men, children, society, businesses, how things are going to work within your, how it all works together. So it's just, I don't worry so much anymore. I mean, I think at the beginning it was probably hard. I don't think I was prepared for it 20 years ago when I started writing and got, dealt with what I dealt with. And there's a lot I've dealt with, but it's way different 20 years later. I mean, it's completely goes out one ear, not the other. I'm a lot less green now, for one thing. And I don't get as much of that anymore anyway. It's all pretty positive that I have now. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, fortunately we are trending. I think more people distrust the mainstream media and they're looking for alternative sources. So I see that as a positive direction.
For sure.
To touch on the 50s thing, it's this word progressivism is such a what an ingenious piece of propaganda, because they just got to define what progress means, right? And so,
because who doesn't want progress?
Who doesn't like progress? It's the thing. You're waiting for the bus. If you wait for the bus 30 minutes, you're going to keep waiting for it. And so I think that's a lot of people's attitude. It's like, well, we can't go back. But no, we have to flip that on then, I think, and say, we want to move forward, and to go back to what we said in the beginning, do what's good for the children. And this isn't, just about women hating or anything like that. Give me a break.
Yeah, I mean, they just want to pull it aside. That's how they discredit you, by just changing the subject and making it personal. So that just means they don't have an argument.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's pretty much all I wanted to get in there. Did you have anything else you wanted to mention about?
Good. I think you covered a lot.
Very good. Well, I thank you so much for coming on. I look for. Oh, yeah, that's right. What is coming down the pipe for you? Are you working on anything?
Yeah. So I'm working on a book that'll be out next year, and I'm working on it with John Townsend, who's a professor in Syracuse, and it's about basically the differences between the sexes, and the fact that how do I say this? I have to come up with exactly what it's about. I'm still in the stages of trying to figure. I mean, I know what it's about, but I don't know that I can say it succinctly. It's about how equality undermines marriage and relationships. Mm-hmm. This faux concept of basically the myth of sexual equality. Why that could never be, and why that, what that's supposed to mean, and why it can never be, and how it's basically ruining marriages and relationships. It sounds uplifting, doesn't it? But at the end, the last chapter is very positive, and it has steps for how to be married for a long, without. Basically, you have to reject this message in order to be happily married.
Yeah, and I think that maybe one thing that can help people reject it is just to realize that if we're equal, then we really can't be unified. There's almost no point in any of that. There's no point in unity, right? If we're all equal, then we're just cogs, basically, interchangeable. Exactly. So I look at equality and I think, gosh, what a horrible, depressing message.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. That's what it is. Are you keeping up with Jordan Peterson?
Yeah.
I hope.
Now and then. Absolutely.
Good. He talks about this a lot. That's why
I did illustrate someone discussing or narrating, analyzing his debate with Kathy Newman.
Good.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah. Oh, I'd like to see that.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Finish it? Did you finish it?
Oh, yeah.
Did you finish it?
It's on the
channel. Yeah, send it to me.
I'll send it to you. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. I'd like to see that. That's funny. So you're still doing this. Do you do this full time?
No. I get it's just on the side, so it's just something that I really like doing. And some people throw me some money now and then. So
yeah. It's great. I don't know how you ever got into it, but it's awesome. I like it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's a need for all kinds of talents, is what I would say.
Yeah. Well, that one's a unique one. I don't even know how you do it, like physically how it gets done, but I'm sure it's fascinating.
Well, I'm not going to reveal all of my secrets here, so.
No, don't. But maybe I'll have you do one for my next book. That'd be fun.
Hey, that'd be fun.
And I'll throw some money at you.
Well, that'd be great. Yeah, I thank you so much for coming on to talk about moms and feminism and everything, and look forward to having you on again.
Awesome. Thanks, Matthew.
Okay.
See you later.
Take care.